The Little Prince, Chapter 1. The Crash in the Desert. The narrator, a pilot, begins the story by talking about his love for flying. He explains that he has always dreamed of exploring the skies and seeing the world from above. One day, while flying his small airplane across the Sahara Desert, something unexpected happens. The engine of his plane suddenly breaks down, forcing him to make an emergency landing in the middle of nowhere. The desert is vast and empty, with nothing but sand stretching as far as the eye can see. The pilot is completely alone. He has very little food and water, and he knows he must fix the plane quickly, or he won't survive. He begins to work on the engine, but it is complicated, and he feels frustrated and tired. That night, the pilot sleeps under the starry sky, feeling lonely and worried. The stars twinkle brightly, and the silence of the desert feels heavy. But just as the sun rises the next morning, something extraordinary happens. The pilot hears a small voice. "Please, draw me a sheep," the voice says. Startled, the pilot looks around. Standing in front of him is a small boy with golden hair. The boy looks very unusual. He is not dressed like anyone the pilot has ever seen, and his calm, curious eyes seem to look right into the pilot's heart. The pilot is so surprised that he forgets his fear and asks, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" But the boy does not answer his questions. Instead, he repeats, "Please, draw me a sheep." The pilot doesn't know how to draw very well. He hasn't practiced since he was a child. But the boy's request feels important, so the pilot takes out his notebook and pencil. He tries his best to draw a sheep, but the boy shakes his head. No, this one is too sick," the boy says. The pilot tries again, but the boy says, "This one is too old." The pilot draws a third sheep, but the boy says, "This one looks like a ram. I want a real sheep." Finally, feeling a little impatient, the pilot draws a box with holes in it. He says, "The sheep you want is inside this box." To the pilot's surprise, the boy's face lights up with joy. "This is perfect," the boy says, holding the drawing close. "This is exactly the sheep I wanted." The pilot is curious about the strange boy. He asks again, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" The boy looks up at the sky and says quietly, "I come from a very small planet. It is far, far away." The pilot doesn't know what to think. A boy from another planet? It sounds impossible. But there is something about the boy that feels magical and true. The pilot decides not to ask too many questions yet. Instead, he decides to focus on fixing his plane. As the hours pass, the boy stays by the pilot's side. He watches the pilot work and sometimes asks curious questions. The boy's calm presence makes the pilot feel less lonely. Even though they have just met, the pilot feels like they are already becoming friends. And so, the adventure begins. The pilot doesn't know it yet, but meeting this strange boy will change his life forever. Chapter 2. The Little Prince's Home. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the little prince and the pilot sat together in the quiet desert. The boy's golden hair shone brightly, and his curious eyes were full of wonder. "Where do you come from?" the pilot asked again. The little prince smiled softly. "I come from a tiny planet," he said. It is so small that I can walk all the way around it in just a few minutes. He drew a small circle in the sand to show the pilot what his planet looked like. The pilot was amazed. "A whole planet that small? What is it like?" he asked. The little prince's face lit up with joy. "It is very special to me. I have 3 tiny volcanoes. 2 are active and 1 is not. But I clean them all regularly. It is very important to keep volcanoes clean so they do not cause trouble." The pilot listened closely. It was hard to imagine living on such a tiny world. "I also have a beautiful flower," the little prince continued. "She is a rose, and she is unlike any other rose in the universe. She appeared on my planet one day, and I have taken care of her ever since." The little prince's eyes became soft as he spoke about the rose. "She is very proud and sometimes difficult," he said with a small smile. "She has 4 thorns to protect herself, but she often says things that make me laugh. I water her every day and cover her with a glass dome at night to keep her safe." "She sounds very important to you," the pilot said. "Oh, she is," the little prince replied. "But sometimes I do not understand her. She says things that confuse me. I think she wants to be loved, but she does not always know how to say it." The pilot nodded, feeling the little prince's love and worry for his rose. "It sounds like you take very good care of her," he said. The little prince looked up at the sky, his face thoughtful. "I do my best, but one day I felt I needed to leave my planet. I wanted to see what else was out there. I wanted to understand more about the universe and myself." The pilot wanted to know more, but he didn't push the boy to continue. Instead, he said, "Your planet and your rose sound very beautiful. I hope you can tell me more about them sometime." The little prince smiled. "I will. But now, I want to hear more about you. Why are you in the desert?" The pilot laughed softly. "My plane broke down," he said. "I was flying over the Sahara when the engine stopped working. I had to land here and try to fix it." The little prince tilted his head, curious. "Is it very hard to fix an airplane?" "It can be," the pilot admitted, "but I'll do my best, just like you do your best for your rose." The little prince nodded, and the 2 of them sat quietly for a moment, feeling a connection despite their very different lives. The little prince's tiny planet and beloved rose seemed magical to the pilot, and the pilot's broken plane was fascinating to the little prince. Together, they were beginning to understand each other's worlds. Chapter 3. The Journey Begins. The little prince told the pilot about the day he left his tiny planet. It was a quiet morning, and the rose had just bloomed in the soft sunlight. "I decided to explore the universe," the little prince said. "I loved my rose, but I wanted to learn more about other places and people, so I said goodbye to her." "Was it hard to leave?" the pilot asked. The little prince nodded. "Yes, it was very hard. She pretended not to care, but I think she was sad. She told me to be careful and to take care of myself. I promised her I would." And so the little prince began his journey. He traveled to nearby asteroids, each one very small, just like his own planet. But these asteroids were different. On each one he met someone new, On the first asteroid, he met a king. The king sat on a big throne, wearing a long robe and a golden crown. "Ah, a visitor," the king said. "Welcome to my kingdom. I rule over everything you see." The little prince looked around. The asteroid was tiny, with only the king and his throne on it. "What do you rule?" the little prince asked. "I rule the stars, the planets, and everything in the universe," the king said proudly. "Do the stars listen to you?" the little prince asked. "Of course," the king replied. "I give orders to everyone and everything, but my orders are always reasonable. I only command what they already want to do." The little prince found this strange but didn't say anything. He said goodbye to the king and continued his journey. On the second asteroid, the little prince met a businessman. The businessman was very busy, counting stars and writing numbers in a big book. "What are you doing?" the little prince asked. "I am counting the stars," the businessman said without looking up. "I own them, and I must keep track of them." "You own the stars?" the little prince asked, surprised. "Yes," the businessman replied. "When I count them, they belong to me. I am very rich." "What do you do with the stars?" the little prince asked. "Nothing," the businessman said. "I just own them." The little prince thought this was very strange. He couldn't understand why someone would want to own the stars but not enjoy their beauty. He said goodbye to the businessman and moved on. As he traveled, the little prince felt both curious and a little sad. The people he met seemed so busy with their own lives that they didn't notice the simple and wonderful things around them. "Grown-ups are very strange," he thought to himself. But the little prince was determined to keep exploring. He knew there was so much more to see and learn in the universe. With each new place he visited, he hoped to find someone who understood the things he cared about: love, friendship, and the beauty of life. Chapter 4: The King and the Businessman. The little prince continued his journey through the stars. After leaving his own tiny planet, he had met interesting people on other asteroids. Each one seemed very different, and each one made him think about life in new ways. On this part of his journey, the little prince first visited the king again. The king lived on a very small planet, just big enough for his throne and his long robe, which covered almost everything. "Ah, my loyal subject has returned," said the king when he saw the little prince. "I'm not your subject," said the little prince politely. "I am just traveling through." "Everyone is my subject," replied the king proudly. "I am the king of the entire universe. I give orders to all the stars and planets." The little prince looked around. The planet was empty except for the king and his throne. "Do the stars really listen to you?" he asked. "Of course," said the king. "I only give orders that are reasonable. For example, I might tell the sun to set, but only when it is time for it to set. Then it will listen." The little prince thought this was a strange way to be a king. "I don't think you really rule the stars," he said. The king smiled. "You can stay and become my minister." "What will I do as a minister?" the little prince asked. "You will judge everything on my planet," said the king. The little prince laughed softly. "But there is nothing here to judge." The king looked a little embarrassed. "Then you can judge yourself. That is the hardest thing of all." The little prince thought for a moment. He liked the idea of being fair, but he didn't want to stay on this tiny planet. "Thank you, but I must continue my journey," he said. The king looked sad but nodded. "Very well, you may go, but remember, you must judge wisely wherever you go." The little prince left and traveled to the next asteroid. There he met a businessman who was sitting at a desk with piles of papers and a calculator. The man was busy counting. "Good morning," said the little prince. "What are you doing?" The businessman barely looked up. "I am counting stars. I own them." "You own the stars?" asked the little prince, surprised. "Yes," said the businessman. "I have counted every single one and written the numbers here in my books. That way they belong to me." "Why do you want to own the stars?" asked the little prince. "Because they make me rich," said the businessman. "What do you do with them?" asked the little prince. "Nothing," said the businessman. "I just own them." The little prince thought about his Rose. He didn't own her, but he loved her and took care of her. "Owning something isn't the same as caring for it," he said softly. The businessman didn't answer. He was too busy counting stars. The little prince sighed and said goodbye. As he continued his journey, he thought about how different grown-ups were from children. "Grown-ups are so strange," he said to himself. But he didn't let that stop him. He was eager to see what other adventures waited for him among the stars. Chapter 5. The Lamplighter and the Geographer. The little prince continued his journey and landed on another asteroid. This time he met a man standing next to a tall lamp. The man was lighting the lamp even though the sun was shining brightly. "Good morning," said the little prince. "What are you doing?" "I am a lamplighter," the man replied. "My job is to light this lamp every evening and put it out every morning." "But the sun is already shining. Why are you lighting the lamp now?" asked the little prince, curious. The lamplighter sighed. "My planet is very small and spins very quickly. A day here lasts only 1 minute. I must light the lamp and put it out every minute. I never have time to rest." The little prince felt sorry for the lamplighter. "Why don't you stop?" he asked gently. "Because it's my duty," said the lamplighter. "I must follow the rules." The little prince admired the man's dedication, but thought his job was very strange. He stayed for a little while, watching the lamplighter work. Then he said, "Goodbye. I hope you find some time to rest." "Thank you," said the lamplighter. "Goodbye." The little prince left and flew to the next asteroid. On this planet, he met a geographer sitting at a large desk filled with maps and books. "Good morning," said the little prince. "What do you do here?" "I am a geographer," said the man proudly. "I write about mountains, rivers, and oceans." The little prince was excited. "Oh, you must travel a lot to see these things." The geographer shook his head. "No, I never leave my desk. I depend on explorers to tell me about the world. They visit places and come back to report what they've seen. I write it all down in my books." "But how do you know if they are telling the truth?" asked the little prince. "I check their stories carefully," said the geographer. "If their report is trustworthy, I record it." The little prince thought this was odd. "Why don't you go see the places for yourself?" he asked. "That is not my job," said the geographer. "I stay here and write. Exploring is for others." The little prince felt a little disappointed. "On my planet, I have a flower," he said. "Would you write about her?" "Flowers are not permanent," said the geographer. "We only record things that last forever, like mountains and rivers." The little prince felt sad. His rose was very important to him, even if she wasn't permanent. He said goodbye to the geographer and continued his journey. As he traveled, he thought about the people he had met. The lamplighter worked so hard but never had time to enjoy life. The geographer wrote about the world but never saw it for himself. The little prince decided that he would keep exploring and cherishing the things he loved, even if they didn't last forever. "Grown-ups are so strange," he said to himself, but he was also learning from them in his own way. Chapter 6. Arrival on Earth. The little prince's journey brought him to a big blue planet called Earth. As his travels continued, he had seen many strange and interesting things, but Earth was the biggest planet he had ever visited. He landed in a vast golden desert where the sand stretched as far as the eye could see. When he stepped onto the sand, the little prince looked around and felt very small. The desert was silent, with no trees, flowers, or people in sight. Only the wind whispered softly through the dunes. "This place feels so empty," he said to himself. But he wasn't afraid. He had been alone before, and he always found something wonderful when he explored. The sun was high and very hot, so the little prince decided to walk slowly and save his strength. As he walked, he saw strange shapes in the sand, lines made by the wind and shadows cast by the small hills of sand. He thought they looked like artwork. "Even in a place like this, there is beauty," he said with a smile. After a while, the little prince became thirsty. He wished there was a well or a stream where he could drink water, but all around him was only sand. He stopped and looked up at the sky. The blue sky reminded him of his own planet and his rose. He missed her very much. "I wonder what she is doing right now," he said softly. "I hope she is safe." As the little prince continued walking, he began to see small signs of life. He noticed a tiny lizard darting across the sand and a bird flying high above. He smiled at the sight of these creatures. "Hello there," he called out to the bird. But the bird didn't stop. It flew far away. Eventually, the little prince reached a rock where he decided to rest. Sitting in the shade, he thought about all the planets he had visited. The people he met were so different, but they all seemed very busy with their own strange tasks. He wondered if Earth would be the same. Just then he heard a voice. "Who are you?" it asked. The little prince looked around but saw no one. The voice came again. "Here, down by your foot." The little prince looked down and saw a snake. It was thin and golden, blending in with the sand. "Hello," said the little prince. "I am the little prince. I've come from another planet." The snake's eyes glimmered. "Another planet? You must have traveled far." "Yes, I have," said the little prince. "I'm exploring. This desert is so quiet and lonely. Do people live here?" The snake shook its head. No, the desert is mostly empty, but you will find people if you travel far enough. Thank you, said the little prince. You are very kind. The snake curled up on the sand. Be careful, little traveler. This world is big, and not everyone will be kind, but you will learn many things here. The little prince nodded. He didn't know what adventures awaited him on earth, but he was ready to keep exploring. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with beautiful colors, the little prince felt both excited and curious about what he would discover next. Chapter 7. The Snake and the Fox. The little prince stayed in the desert for a while, walking and thinking about all the people he had met on his journey. One evening, as the sun was setting, the golden snake he had seen before appeared again. "Hello, little traveler," said the snake. "Have you found what you are looking for?" The little prince shook his head. "I'm not sure what I'm looking for. Maybe I want to understand life better. Maybe I want to find friends." The snake looked at him with wise eyes. "You will learn, little one. But remember, not everything important can be seen with your eyes. The most important things are felt with the heart." The little prince thought about the snake's words. He didn't understand them completely, but he felt they were true. "Thank you," he said softly. The next morning, the little prince left the desert and walked until he came to a field of tall grass. As he walked, he saw something move. It was a small orange fox with a bushy tail. The fox peeked out from behind the grass, curious but cautious. "Hello," said the little prince. "Who are you?" "I am a fox," said the animal. "Who are you?" "I am the little prince," he replied. "I'm looking for friends. Will you be my friend?" The fox tilted its head. "I can't be your friend yet," it said. "First you must tame me." "What does it mean to tame?" asked the little prince. "To tame means to create ties," said the fox. "Right now you are just another boy to me, and I am just a fox to you. But if you tame me, we will become important to each other. You will be unique to me, and I will be unique to you." The little prince smiled. "How do I tame you?" "You must spend time with me," the fox explained. "You must be patient. At first you will sit far away from me. Each day you will come a little closer. Over time, we will trust each other." So the little prince spent his days with the fox. Each day he sat a little closer, and the fox began to trust him. They talked about many things, and the little prince learned a lot about the fox's life. Slowly, they became friends. One day the fox said, "Now you have tamed me. You are special to me, and I am special to you." The little prince felt happy, but also a little sad. "Why do I feel like crying?" he asked. "Because you have tamed me," said the fox. "When you form a bond with someone, they become a part of your heart. Saying goodbye will be hard, but it is worth it. The love and friendship we share will always stay with you." The little prince nodded, understanding a little better. He knew he would always remember the fox. Before they said goodbye, the fox gave the little prince one last lesson. "Here is my secret," said the fox. "It is very simple. You can only see clearly with your heart. What is most important is invisible to the eyes." The little prince thanked the fox and hugged him tightly. Then, with a heavy heart, he continued his journey. As he walked, he repeated the fox's words to himself. What is most important is invisible to the eyes. He felt wiser and knew he was one step closer to understanding what truly mattered in life. Chapter 8. The Garden of Roses. The little prince continued his journey across Earth. One day, he found himself in a beautiful garden. The garden was filled with roses, hundreds of them, their petals soft and colorful. The sight took his breath away. He walked among the roses, touching their petals gently. They looked just like the rose on his planet. He felt a mix of wonder and sadness as he realized something surprising. "There are so many roses here," he said softly to himself. "My rose told me she was the only one like her in the universe, but she is just like all these other roses." The little prince sat down in the middle of the garden, feeling confused and a little lonely. "Maybe my rose isn't as special as I thought," he whispered. Tears welled up in his eyes. While he was sitting there, thinking about his rose, the fox's words came back to him. What is most important is invisible to the eyes. You can only see clearly with your heart. The little prince wiped his tears and thought about his rose. She wasn't like the other roses, even if she looked the same. He had taken care of her, watered her, and protected her under the glass dome. She was special to him because of the time they had spent together and the love he felt for her. "Yes," he said to himself, "my rose is special because she is mine. I tamed her and she tamed me. That's why she is different from all these other roses." Feeling a little better, the little prince stood up and looked at the roses again. This time he smiled. "You are all beautiful," he said to the roses in the garden. "But you are not my rose. My rose is the one I love and care for. She is the one who is unique to me." The roses swayed gently in the breeze, as if they understood his words. The little prince felt a sense of peace. He knew now that his rose was still the most important flower in his life, not because she was the only one, but because she was his friend and his responsibility. As he left the garden, the little prince carried the memory of the roses with him, but more importantly, he carried the lesson he had learned. Love and care make something, or someone, special, even if they look the same as others. With a hopeful heart, the little prince continued his journey, eager to see what else the world would teach him. Chapter 9. The Secret of the Fox. After leaving the Garden of Roses, the little prince thought deeply about what he had learned. He remembered his time with the fox and the lessons they had shared. The fox's words stayed in his heart, but he wanted to understand them even more clearly. One evening, the little prince saw the fox again, sitting under a tree. The orange fur of the fox glowed softly in the light of the setting sun. The little prince ran over, happy to see his friend. "Fox," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. Can you explain your secret again? I want to understand it better." The fox smiled and said, "Of course, little one. My secret is very simple. You can only see clearly with your heart. What is most important is invisible to the eyes." The little prince nodded but still looked thoughtful. "Does this mean love?" he asked. "Yes," said the fox. When you tame someone, you create a bond. You are no longer just a boy, and I am no longer just a fox. We are special to each other. That is what love is. Caring for someone because they mean something to you. The little prince sat down beside the fox. But doesn't it hurt to care about someone? I miss my rose, and that makes me sad. The fox nodded gently. Yes, it can hurt, but it is worth it. Your rose is special because you have spent time with her. You have cared for her, watered her, and protected her. That makes her unique to you, even though she looks like the other roses. The little prince thought about his rose. He could still see her in his mind, her soft petals, and the way she spoke with pride. He missed her, but he realized how much he loved her. So love is about responsibility too, he said quietly. Yes, said the fox. When you love someone, you take care of them. You are responsible for their happiness, just as they are responsible for yours. That is what makes the bond so precious. The little prince smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart. Thank you, fox. You have taught me something very important. I will always remember your secret. The fox stood up and looked at the little prince with kind eyes. Goodbye, my friend, he said, and remember, you are responsible for what you have tamed. Your rose is waiting for you. The little prince hugged the fox tightly. Goodbye, he said, his voice full of gratitude. As the fox disappeared into the fields, the little prince felt both a little sad and very happy. He understood now that love and bonds made life meaningful, even if they sometimes brought pain. With a determined heart, the little prince continued his journey, knowing that he carried the love of his rose and the wisdom of the fox with him wherever he went. Chapter 10. The Well and the Farewell. The little prince and the pilot had been together in the desert for many days. The sun was hot, and they had very little water left. The pilot worked hard to fix his plane, but he was worried they wouldn't find water in time. One morning, the little prince said, "Let's look for a well. There must be one somewhere." The pilot looked at the endless sand and felt unsure. A well in the middle of the desert? It's impossible, he said. But the little prince smiled. Nothing is impossible if you believe. Let's try. They walked together under the bright sun, talking about the stars, the little prince's rose, and all the planets he had visited. The pilot began to forget his thirst and tiredness because of the little prince's cheerful spirit. After a long time, they saw something in the distance. It was a well. The pilot couldn't believe his eyes. They ran to it, and the pilot pulled up the bucket full of fresh, cool water. Both of them drank deeply, feeling their strength return. "This water tastes so good," said the little prince. "It's more than just water. It feels like a gift." The pilot nodded. "Yes, it's special because we worked together to find it." They rested by the well, feeling peaceful, but the little prince's face grew serious. "It's time for me to go back to my planet," he said softly. The pilot felt a pang of sadness. "Do you really have to go?" The little prince nodded. "I miss my rose. She needs me. I am responsible for her, and I love her." The pilot understood. He had learned from the little prince that love and responsibility go together. He smiled and said, "I will miss you, my friend. You have taught me so much." The little prince smiled back. "And you have been a wonderful friend. Remember, what is most important is invisible to the eyes. Always look with your heart." The next morning the little prince said goodbye. The pilot watched as the little prince walked away, his golden hair shining in the sunlight. Though the pilot felt sad, he also felt grateful for everything the little prince had shared with him. The pilot fixed his plane and flew away from the desert, carrying the little prince's lessons in his heart. He often looked up at the stars, remembering his little friend and the love that made life so meaningful.